All right, you asked me about architects. So let's start with the Oaks, built in 1885. The architect was Solon I. Haas, Haas, who is a fairly well-known Los Angeles architect. And since the Monroes had been living in Los Angeles, that's probably why they knew his name. Then we get to 1887. Some of the larger houses, such as Idlewild, Mrs. Wilson's house, the Spence house, a couple others. Louder. Were designed by the San Francisco firm of Newsom and Newsom, who opened a branch office in Los Angeles during the land boom. They were already well known because of their work in San Francisco. Their reputation preceded them, so several people from Los Angeles who were planning homes in Monrovia went to their firm for the design of their houses. So they designed Idlewild. They designed the house across the street that was demolished about 1950 for General and Mrs. Pyle's daughter and son-in-law, E.W. Little. They designed Mrs. Wilson's house, originally at Foothill and Myrtle. They designed the E.F. Spence house on Prospect. They designed a small cottage for E.F. Spence's niece, Sarah Spence Armstrong, that burned about 1908. I think that's it. Can you think of any more?
The Crandall Lee house was not theirs, or is
It was,
possibly?
to the best of my knowledge, it was not. I've never seen anything to indicate who the architect was. So that would take care of the 80s. Also, local architect Luther Reed Blair designed several houses. I believe he designed Mills View. He designed the original Orange Avenue School. He designed a house for E.P. Large, which was in the 100 block of North Myrtle. It was unfortunately torn down in the early 1970s. Designed the house that I moved to save. His personal residence is at 508 South Ivy. He might have designed the house for the post officer, Mr. Metcalf at Alta Vista and Hillcrest. I don't know. That's a supposition on my part. Those are the ones I can think of. Most notable local architect, notable representative work of an architect is Mrs. Butt's house at Ivy and Greystone. It's a shingle style designed by Arthur B. Benton, who designed the Mission Inn in Riverside. Also designed the first clubhouse for the Saturday Afternoon Club. Moving on to the early 1900s, Frank O. Eager, who was a Canadian by birth, designed a lot of houses over 25 or more years. He designed the Marshall's house that later became the Masonic Temple. He designed a house down the street from you at 217 North Alta Vista. He designed, it's 219 North Primrose, lots of houses and lots of styles. And he was able to move with the times. And the Marshall's house was kind of shingle style, in that the first floor was granite, the upper floors were mansard roofs with shingling. And then he moved into the Craftsman style, and they moved into period revivals in the 20s. Also designed the second Orange Avenue School in an Aztec motif. And if you see pictures of it, you'll think, that's a really weird building. And it was. Other, let's see, teens, 20s. I've never been able to document it, but I believe that there is a house in Monrovia designed by Lloyd Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright's son. Also in Monrovia is a duplex designed by Irving J. Gill. That I'm pretty sure of because it was identified in Gebhardt and Winter's Architectural Guide as being an Irving Gill in Monrovia. Or you asked me about styles. The Newsom brothers designed in Queen Anne or Eastlake.
Both Victorian styles?
Both Victorian styles. The Eastlake was more rectilinear, whereas the Queen Anne was a little more curvilinear in that it had arches, rounded arched bays, things like that.
Do we know anything about where they got the materials? I mean, these houses were constructed at a time when there's very few houses here, so, and they were often of redwood.
They were.
Where did they get all
lumber
this?
probably came from Humboldt County, California. The lumber probably itself, the Douglas fir that they used, was probably from either Northern California or Oregon. When the land boom was really underway, there was a planing mill on Huntington Drive, I think Huntington at Myrtle or close to that, specifically designed to finish lumber for construction. They would have taken some raw lumber sometimes and then further milled it to finish grade so it could be used in construction. Kirchhoff Kuzner was the mill name, and the Kirchhoff name is still around in Los Angeles. Styles. Mrs. Butt's house is basically shingle style. Supposedly the model or the inspiration was a seaside cottage on the East Coast. I mentioned the Marshall's house was essentially shingle style. The Women's Clubhouse of 1905 was very roughly Tudor. It had a half timbering effect. It also had a lot of stonework in front that would have been more Craftsman than Tudor, but that's what they used. Frank Eager, he designed bungalows. The Tippel Brothers did their own designing and construction. One of their ads said something like, if we build your house, the plans are free, or something like that.
So tell us about the Tippel Brothers.
Well, they were originally from Posen, Germany. They emigrated at an early time. Maybe came to California for health reasons. There was Gustav and William, drawing a blank on the third brother. But they built in Monrovia. They also built in Los Angeles on 51st Street. There's a grouping of their houses, and I think that might be a local historic landmark district in Los Angeles. Essentially, craftsmen. In the teens, they built a couple houses that were essentially craftsmen, I think, in physical layout, but they were stucco instead. Two that they built on East Foothill at Shamrock, they are both stucco examples rather than shingle style or shingle sided examples.
The Wild Rose.
The Tippel Brothers built a number of those. Some of them it's possible to positively identify because there are building permits. The city didn't start issuing building permits until 1911. So for those craftsmen that were built prior to 1911, it's not always possible to be sure who the builder was.
Were they influenced by Green and Green in Pasadena, or
Definitely. Well,
not, or?
I would say it were probably influenced largely by the craftsman movement itself, which they adapted. The Green and Greens tended to be larger. There is the Everest House on Highland that looks Green and Green inspired because it's on a scale that would have been more typical of the Green Brothers rather than the more modest scaling of the ones the Tippel Brothers built.
And who designed that house?
Let's see, it was once by,
It's not a Tippel Brothers house?
I don't think that, well, let me see. Arthur Kelly was the architect. And the house right across the street. But when Gebhardt and Winter did their survey, a lot had been done to that house. The Everest House is almost original. The house across the street, they'd added an attached garage, they had added a corner tower, and Robert Winter's terse description is, the house across the street was once by Arthur Kelly.
What are the numbers of those two houses?
Let me see, 173
North Highland?
Highland Place is the Everest House, and 174 is the Daniels House. Now, the current owners have been working on it for years, and they're gradually restoring it. I think the last time I looked, I think the corner tower is gone, but their goal is, as much as practical and possible, they will restore it and get rid of some of those later, quote, improvements, unquote.
Any other significant architects?
Did I mention Irving J. Gill?
I don't know.
Okay. He designed a bungalow that appears to be poured concrete on South Magnolia, like 400 something South Magnolia. It was identified by Gebhardt and Winter, so I'm reasonably sure that that's correct. And I think I looked up the building permit. It may have given it, well, it gave the builder. Anyway, I'm pretty sure it's an Irving J. Gill. And why Gill has a house in Monrovia, I don't know.
Now, what about the small homes in Monrovia where the architect isn't known? The workers' cottages, the styles of some of those.
You know, I suspect that the builders may have had plan books where you'd like the Sears kit houses, where you could sit down and thumb through and pick a design that struck your fancy and then say, I'm going to order that one. It might have been, this is only a suggestion, that earlier than that, there might have been books of architecture, and you could thumb through and pick one you liked and say, I want you to build that one. There were plan books. There are a couple examples at the Duarte Museum that were taken out of a larger, the same plan so-and-so, so many square feet, or it tells what it would cost, and they show the exterior rendering, and then they show the floor plan inside. So you could look at something like that and say, I like that, yes, let's do it that way. And then maybe make some changes as you wished, but the basic plan and what it looked like on the exterior and what the floor plan was like on the interior. We had the Women's Clubhouse was designed by a very well-known Pasadena architect, Myron Hunt. And unfortunately, that was torn down after the Women's Club voted to disband in the 70s and the property was sold. Trying to think of other, not necessarily local, but regional architects whose work is represented in Monrovia. That's about it. I'm sure there are others, but off the top of my head, yeah.